At the annual partners meeting of Caldwell Architecture Group, my mother-in-law stood at the head of the boardroom table, looked me directly in the eye, and said the words I never imagined hearing from someone who had once called me daughter. "We're restructuring the firm. Your position has been eliminated. Effective immediately." The room went completely silent. 14 people staring at their laptops, their coffee cups, anywhere but at me. My husband sat 3 chairs to my left and said nothing. Not a word. He straightened his tie and wrote something in his notebook like I had simply asked a question he didn't know the answer to. Security didn't escort me out. That almost made it worse. I had to walk through the open studio myself. Past the drafting tables where I had worked for 6 years. Past the junior designers who had learned sustainable building practices from me. Past the wall where 3 of my projects hung in framed photographs. The Riverside Community Center. The Westmount Heritage Restoration. The Lakeview Social Housing Complex, which had won a National Design Award 18 months prior and whose trophy sat in a glass case near the reception desk, with my mother-in-law's name on the accompanying plaque. I carried my cardboard box to the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby and stood there watching the floor numbers count down. My name was not on that plaque. It had never been on that plaque. I want to tell you something about the person I was before I married into the Caldwell family, because I think it matters. I graduated top of my class from the University of Waterloo School of Architecture. I articled at a mid-size firm in Ottawa for 3 years, built a small but serious reputation in sustainable design, and by 29 I had 2 provincial awards and a feature in Canadian Architect magazine. I was not someone who stumbled into success. I had worked for every single thing I had. When I met my husband at a conference in Toronto, I thought his family's firm was an opportunity. He was charming and smart and told me on our 3rd date that his mother had been asking to meet me. His mother ran Caldwell Architecture Group, one of the oldest and most respected architectural firms in Ontario. His father had founded it 30 years earlier and retired. The business was hers now. We dated for 2 years. We got engaged. We married at a vineyard in Niagara-on-the-Lake, and my mother-in-law gave a toast about how the firm was gaining not just a daughter but a talent. I believed her. I think that's what embarrasses me most, looking back. I genuinely believed her. I joined the firm as a senior associate. Within 8 months I was leading the sustainable design division I had essentially created from nothing. I brought in 4 major municipal contracts in the first 2 years, including the Lakeview project. I mentored 3 junior architects. I worked 60-hour weeks, and I did it because I loved the work and because I thought I was building something that was also mine. I was not building something that was mine. I was building something that belonged to the Caldwells, and the moment they felt I understood that clearly enough, they no longer needed me to believe otherwise. What I didn't know then, and only pieced together later, was that my mother-in-law had begun the process of trademarking our sustainable design methodology under the firm's name alone, 6 months before she fired me. The approach I had developed, the framework I had documented and presented at 2 national conferences, was being quietly absorbed into Caldwell Architecture Group's intellectual property portfolio while I was still sitting at my desk refining it. I found out about this 3 weeks after the meeting. I'll get to that. The night of the day I was let go, my husband came home late. I had not cried. I had made dinner, which in retrospect was a strange thing to do, but I think I needed something ordinary to hold on to. He sat down across from me and I asked him directly whether he had known it was coming. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said that the firm needed to move in a different direction. That it wasn't personal. That I would land somewhere good because I was talented. He said all of this in the same tone you might use to explain a delayed transit line. Regrettable but inevitable and ultimately not his problem. I asked him if he had defended me in any of the conversations leading up to this. He looked at his plate. I had my answer. I did not throw anything. I did not raise my voice. I went to the bedroom and I sat on the edge of the bed and I thought very carefully about what was real and what I had invented. The marriage I thought I had. The partnership I thought we were. The family I had tried to join for 6 years. None of it was what I thought it was. Over the next 2 weeks, my husband's behavior shifted in ways that were subtle at first and then not subtle at all. He began talking about the condo we shared as if it were primarily his. Technically it was we had purchased it during the marriage, but the mortgage was in his name at my mother-in-law's suggestion, something I had been naive enough to accept at the time because we were married and I had trusted that marriage meant something shared. He mentioned, twice, that it might be practical for me to look at rentals in the West End. He said this with the same flat reasonableness he had used to discuss the firm. I consulted a family lawyer named Patricia Okonkwo, who had an office on Bloor Street and a reputation I had heard about from a colleague years earlier. I sat across from her and laid out the situation, and she listened without interrupting and then told me several things very clearly. Under Ontario's Family Law Act, the matrimonial home is subject to equal possession rights regardless of whose name is on the title. I had a legal right to remain in that condo until we had a formal separation agreement or court order. Any attempt to pressure me out without legal process was not something I needed to accommodate. She also told me to document everything. Every conversation. Every asset. Every professional contribution I had made during the marriage. That last part turned out to be more important than either of us anticipated. I want to tell you about the methodology. Because this is where the story changes, and I need you to understand the technical piece to understand what happened next. During my time at Caldwell Architecture Group, I had developed a proprietary process for integrating passive energy systems into heritage building renovations. It was a specific, documented approach. I had written a 40-page internal manual, given it a name, presented it at the Ontario Association of Architects annual symposium, and published a condensed version in a peer-reviewed journal under my own name 18 months before the firm began the trademark application process. That publication date mattered enormously. When I met with Patricia again and showed her the journal article, the conference presentation records, the internal emails where I had introduced the methodology to the team, and then the trademark filing dates my mother-in-law had initiated, she set down her pen and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen from her before. She said, "They may have made a significant error. Intellectual property in an employment context in Canada is complicated. Generally, work created in the course of employment belongs to the employer. But work that predates employment, or work developed substantially outside of employment scope and documented independently, exists in a different category. My journal publication predated my employment at Caldwell by 3 months. The conference presentation had been given under my personal name and institutional affiliation, not the firm's. I had documentation showing the methodology was already formed before I walked through their door. What my mother-in-law had attempted to trademark was not something the firm had created. It was something I had brought with me. Patricia referred me to an IP specialist. We began building a file. I want to be honest about those months because I don't want to make it sound cleaner than it was. I found a rental apartment in the annex, a 1-bedroom on the 2nd floor of a converted Victorian house. I negotiated a fair separation agreement with the help of Patricia's office. My husband, to his credit or perhaps to his lawyer's advice, did not contest the equalization of our shared assets, which meant I walked away with enough to cover a year of living expenses and legal fees. I was not destitute. But I was starting over at 37 in a city where my professional reputation was attached to a firm that had just quietly erased me. I applied for 2 senior positions at other firms. I got to the second interview stage at both. At one of them, I was told by the hiring partner, with visible discomfort, that they had received a reference call from Caldwell Architecture Group and that the feedback had been complicated. He didn't elaborate. He didn't have to. My mother-in-law had made a phone call. Possibly more than one. I spent 3 weeks being very still and very angry and very careful about what I did with that anger. I went for long walks along the Don Valley Trail. I called my sister in Vancouver every few days. I reread the journal article with my name on it approximately 14 times. Then I opened a business. I had enough documentation, enough professional credibility under my own name, and enough of a network outside of the Caldwell ecosystem to begin consulting independently. I registered my company. I called it Meridian Sustainable Design with the Ontario government as a sole proprietorship and immediately began the process of formalizing the methodology under my own IP with the assistance of specialist Patricia had connected me to. The first client came through a former colleague who had left Caldwell 2 years earlier and remembered exactly whose ideas those were. A mid-sized developer in Hamilton was planning a mixed-use heritage conversion and needed someone who understood the specific technical challenges involved. I met with them on a Tuesday, submitted a proposal on Thursday, and had a signed contract by the following Monday. The second client came from the journal article. A municipal sustainability officer in Ottawa had read it when it was published and kept my name. She reached out through LinkedIn and asked whether I was available for a consultation on a community housing project. I was available. The IP case moved slowly, as these things do. My specialist sent a formal notice to Caldwell Architecture Group's legal team in late spring outlining our position on the methodology's origins and requesting that they withdraw the trademark application or face a formal challenge proceeding. I do not know exactly what conversations happened inside that firm after that letter arrived. I know that my mother-in-law's assistant called Patricia's office twice in 1 week, and that my mother-in-law herself called my cell phone on a Saturday morning and left a voicemail asking if we could have a conversation. I listened to it standing in my kitchen with a cup of coffee. I did not call back that day. By the time we did speak, which was through our respective legal teams, Meridian Sustainable Design had 4 active contracts and 2 proposals under review. I had presented at a regional conference in Mississauga and been approached afterward by a developer from Calgary who was planning a significant heritage restoration project and had been told by multiple people in the room that I was the person to talk to. I had hired a part-time project coordinator named Daria who had 20 years of experience and a gift for managing timelines that I deeply did not have. The Caldwell family withdrew the trademark application. In exchange, I agreed not to pursue further legal action related to the IP dispute. I also agreed to a non-disparagement clause, which I am respecting now by not telling you the specific legal details of why their application was so thoroughly untenable. What I can tell you is that within 14 months of being walked out of that boardroom, Meridian Sustainable Design held contracts with 6 clients across Ontario, 1 in Alberta, and had been shortlisted for a federal government sustainability initiative worth more than I had earned in my final 2 years at Caldwell combined. I can also tell you that Caldwell Architecture Group lost the municipal contract renewal for the Westmount Heritage Project, which they had held for 11 years. The city's procurement office issued a public call for proposals. Meridian submitted. We won on the strength of the methodology, the track record, and the fact that the person who had actually designed the approach was now the one proposing to implement it. My mother-in-law called again when that announcement went public. She did not leave a voicemail this time. I know because I watched her name appear on my screen and I put the phone face down on my desk and finished the site review I was in the middle of. There is something I want to say to anyone who is listening and recognizes their own situation somewhere in this story. The most disorienting part of what happened to me was not the job loss. It was not the dissolution of the marriage, as painful as that was. It was the realization that I had spent 6 years in an arrangement where my contributions were considered assets of theirs and my presence was considered temporary. Not because I had done anything wrong. Not because I was insufficient. But because I had been too valuable in a way that threatened the story they needed to tell about themselves. When people around you systematically minimize what you bring, it is not evidence of your inadequacy. It is evidence of their awareness of your value and their fear of acknowledging it openly. The morning after the board meeting, I woke up in my own home and did not know who I was professionally anymore. The work I had built my identity around had been attached to a name that wasn't mine. I had made the mistake of building on land that didn't belong to me. The only thing that saved me was that I had been doing serious, documented, attributable work under my own name the entire time. That journal article. Those conference presentations. Those emails where I introduced the methodology in my own words and explained its origins. The paper trail was what gave me a foundation when everything else had been taken. Not because I had anticipated needing it, but because I had simply been doing honest work and keeping honest records. I filed my taxes as a sole proprietor for the first time that spring and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and a glass of wine and looked at the number in the revenue column and then looked at it again. I called my sister and read her the number. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "You built that in 14 months. I had built it in 14 months. From a 1-bedroom apartment in the annex with a second-hand desk from a Facebook marketplace listing and a printer that jammed every third document. From a client list that started with one former colleague who remembered whose ideas those were. From a methodology that had always had my name on it, even when other people tried to put theirs over top. The Westmount project broke ground in October. I was on site the morning they began the foundation work. It was 6 degrees and overcast in that particular way. That means November is coming. And I stood there in my steel-toed boots on the edge of a building site and thought about the glass case in the Caldwell lobby with the award trophy in it. I thought about the way the room had gone quiet. I thought about my husband writing something in his notebook. Then I turned back to the foundation and I talked to the site supervisor about the thermal bridging specifications, and I stopped thinking about any of them at all. That, I think, is what moving forward actually looks like. Not a dramatic moment. Not a confrontation where you say all the right things. Just a morning on a work site where the people you used to need to impress have become genuinely irrelevant to the life you are standing in the middle of building. My mother-in-law's firm is still operating. My ex-husband is still at the firm. I hope they are well, in the specific distant way you hope things for people who are no longer part of your story. Meridian Sustainable Design is incorporated now, no longer a sole proprietorship. Daria is full-time. We have a proper office on Dundas West with a drafting table and a printer that works reliably and a small sign by the door with the company name on it. Last month, I was asked to sit on a panel at the Canadian Green Building Council's annual conference. The moderator introduced me by listing my projects and my credentials and the work I had done. She introduced me by my name. Just my name. No one else's. I sat on that stage and I looked out at the room and I thought about that cardboard box and the elevator counting down to the lobby. And the 14 people who had stared at their laptops while my professional life was ended in sentences. I thought about how certain my mother-in-law had been that morning. The confidence of someone who believed they controlled the situation completely, and that my exit was simply a formality before they moved forward with what they had already decided. I thought about the journal article with its publication date that preceded my employment by 3 months. Then the moderator asked her first question and I leaned toward the microphone and I answered it, and I did not think about any of them again for the rest of the afternoon.